I'm Peter Russell, and I'd like to welcome you to this third in our series of 5 programs in which we're looking at the times we're passing through and what this means for us in our own lives and some of the things we can do personally to help us cope better with the changes that are coming. And in the first program we looked at the acceleration of change and at the environmental crisis, and then we looked in the second program at creativity and some of the ways, some of the things we can do to help ourselves become more creative. In this program, I want to look at the subject of stress and how we can actually become more stable in our lives, how we can cope with change without becoming burnt out and diseased or ill, because I think change is going to become more and more of an issue in the future. And as before, I'm joined in the studio by Tony and Matea and Vida and Jerry, who will be joining in the discussions. Maybe I should start by just saying a little bit more about what I mean by stress, because stress is a word that's used in many different ways in the world today. And for me, I like to distinguish stress from pressure. I think pressure is something that we all need. If we didn't have the pressure of deadlines, getting things done on time, of expectations, whether our own expectations or other people's expectations, we wouldn't do much. I think we need pressure to keep us performing, and in the future I think the pressure is going to get even greater. I think what we don't need are the negative side effects of being under pressure. We don't need to have stomach aches or headaches or not be sleeping well or have heart attacks or whatever because we're under pressure. So I think this is the challenge of today. How do we live with pressure without actually becoming stressed by the pressure? So I would define stress as the unwanted side effects of having to function under pressure. So, I mean, I think we all live lives in the modern world. We're probably all under stresses of one form or another, or rather, let's say, pressures of one form or another. I mean, what are some of the pressures you feel you're under? Matteo, as a student.
Well, I think it's I'd like to achieve something faster that actually my time limits or my own capabilities actually, that I could do it. It's
so pressure of time, yes.
Pressure of time.
Yes.
Me as a bit older person, I can say that quite stressful can or could be the ambitions that did not come true.
Yeah. What about you two? Jerry?
I'd say the biggest stress in my life is attempting to manage my time more efficiently with multiple priorities and responsibilities and constant unexpected events arising. How to cope with the different demands.
And mine is probably typical of so many young mothers out there trying to reconcile your personal family duties that you think you need to attend to, and then the role in the society or the duty to do something, the career and so on. So how to put these two together.
And what would you say the effects are on you of these pressures? How do they affect you? What are the unwanted side effects you have from these pressures?
Well, I think health is certainly one.
Health, yes. Yeah. Matteo, Tony?
Well, I think there is one very important thing. A person under stress, or a person who is not pleased with himself, has assumption that he does not have a right to rest.
Yeah, and so we keep on pushing ourselves.
Doesn't deserve it.
And so we keep on pushing ourselves harder and harder. Yes, I think this is one of the patterns. You get into what's sometimes called a vicious circle. You're getting stressed. And often when we're under stress, we're not actually performing as well as when we're relaxed. And then we go faster and faster. And that's often what leads to breakdown, is when people just keep on going harder and harder and harder.
People tend to worry much more also.
Worry, yes, yeah.
Or being patient with the others. I mean, if that's what I'm experiencing. For example, if I want something very much, it's been not anguish with other people.
Yeah. What's interesting, though, is that underlying all sorts of stress, there seems to be a standard reaction in the body. And that's probably because all forms of stress in one way or another are some form of threat. They're either a threat to our security or our sense of inner well-being or how other people think of us. We may feel socially threatened. Our sense of identity may feel threatened. There's always some sense of threat. If it's time pressure, it may be your sense of being in control of your life is being threatened because you're out of control. Whatever, there's always some sort of threat. And what happens is whenever we're under threat, the body knows only one way to react, which is actually designed for an external physical threat, which it goes into what's called the flight-fight reaction, which is when the blood pressure goes up and the muscles become tense and those sorts of things. Actually, what's happening is the body's getting ready, as the name says, to flee or to fight, to run for your life, if you like, or fight to the death, which is very useful in, if you're in the forest and you're being attacked by a tiger, that sort of situation, you need to run or fight. What happens in the modern world is that we have many situations, many pressures, which we feel are threatening to us, and yet we don't actually need to run or fight or do anything like that. Yet the body gets prepared to do it, and our muscles become tense. We may even find our fists becoming tense, but we don't have to do anything.
Could we say that it's like maybe seeing our behavior patterns?
Yes, yes.
Changing them?
Yes.
The resistance?
I think that's part of managing stress, is again, taking more control over ourselves and saying, here is a behavior pattern, a physical reaction, which isn't actually very useful today, because it may be useful if you're about to be run over by a bus in the street. You want to be able to run for your life. Occasionally it's useful. But I think 99% of the time that we have this reaction, we're not actually asked to do anything except maybe just continue sitting in a chair or sitting in a car in traffic or whatever. And yet our bodies are getting ready to go and we do nothing. And that's where a lot of the illness and side effects come from, the fact that your body is all hyped up. If you like, it's in a state of emergency and we don't do anything. We just sit there. And that's why our stomachs begin to form ulcers because they're digesting themselves, or our muscles get permanently tense, or we start getting problems with our circulation or whatever. And one of the ways we can do that, of course, is to do what the body asks for. And that's why exercise is very useful for stress. The body's in a state where it's wanting to do something. And exercise, people who run a lot or play tennis or swim, you're actually working off the reaction to some extent.
But is this actually working out the reaction, or it is just suppressing the real cause?
Well, what it's doing, I think, is dealing with some of the problem, that your body is wanting to do something. And so it's working it off. It's healthy if the body's full of adrenaline, blood sugar, wanting to move. It's healthy to move. I think in our life, we sit still far too much.
So you're changing the present situation and giving it a peaceful time to deal with it, maybe at a more appropriate time?
Yes, that helps. Well, I think also with exercise, you actually, people who do exercise a lot feel they're in a better state of mind after the exercise. But I think there's something else you can do, which maybe you're touching on, which is look at what it is that's causing the threat, to actually look inside ourselves and begin to understand that most of the time we're threatened, the threat is not out there. It's an illusion that we create in our own mind, in our own thinking.
But you were talking about very basic, instinctive things as fear and anger.
Yes.
Do you mean that that something can cause these things, a cause that is not natural, that is only our illusion?
Yes, yes. I mean, give you a very simple everyday example. Most people I know say they get stressed by sitting in a traffic jam. And I think 90% of people say they get stressed by traffic jams. In fact, if you think about it, there's nothing stressful about a traffic jam in itself. I mean, and the traffic jam doesn't actually cause you stress. All it does is stop the traffic. If you're feeling stressed, it's because there's a voice in your head which is telling you what's going to happen if you're late home, what's going to happen if you're late for work. This voice in your head is telling you this is not a good situation, that my well-being is threatened, and that feeling of being threatened starts the body off. It starts the heart beating or feeling angry, or you start hitting the horn, thinking if you hit the horn hard enough the traffic will move. Now somebody else could sit in exactly the same traffic jam, exactly the same car even, and say, isn't this wonderful? I've got no telephones ringing, no meetings to go to, I haven't got to sit in front of my computer, I can relax, haven't got any papers to sign. Here, for the first time in the day, it's the sort of situation I've been looking for all day long. So the situation itself hasn't caused the stress. It's just a different way of looking at it. The person who sees a situation as a threat to your inner well-being is going to feel stress. Someone who sees a situation as an opportunity to, relax or do something else, will have a completely different reaction. So there, it isn't the situation itself which is stressful, but how we see it. And in my experience with working with people, I think probably 90% of stress, not all of it, but 90% of it is our perception of the situation. We think, this is not good for me in some way or another. And I think the more we can learn to manage that, manage our inner reactions, the better we can handle the external world.
So you say that people can not only control these basic reactions, but they can even eliminate them.
Yes. I think what we can do is we can switch it off. We can say, this doesn't need to occur. So if let's take the traffic jam. If you're sitting in the traffic jam, you actually have a choice about how you react. You can either say to yourself, I don't like this, it's not good for me, all these awful things are going to happen when I'm late home, so I promised the children I'd be home by 6 o'clock or whatever. You can tell yourself those things and so trigger the stress reaction, or you can tell yourself something else. You can say, here is a situation, I can sit back, I can relax for 2 minutes, I can put on some music, I can adjust the air conditioning, I can close my eyes, whatever. You have a different reaction. So you have the choice about how you react. And I think that's what we forget in today's world. What we tend to do is blame the world the whole time. We say, you are making me angry. Not always the traffic jam, it's somebody else. You've made me angry. And the truth is, in some senses, nobody ever makes you angry. What we should be saying perhaps is, I make myself angry over what somebody else has done. But if we say, you made me angry, say something that happened to me several years back, which taught me a lot. A colleague I was working with in business, I found out he'd been lying to me. And at the time, I found that very upsetting and made myself very angry over it. In fact, it was so bad that weeks later, if I even thought of this person, that would guarantee I'd have a sleepless night. Until I realized that that person wasn't doing anything at all to me now. I was the person who, by thinking about this situation, creating all these negative thoughts, was actually disturbing my own sleep and creating stress for myself. So it's like taking more responsibility, or the word people sometimes use is becoming more of an architect of your own life. So you're designing your life rather than letting other people control your emotions.
But
Yeah.
I also think, that it's very important not to deny ourselves that because we usually think it's bad to feel anger or to be angry at someone. Maybe we could it's the way how we show it or present it, maybe that's we can change, but it's not good that if we suppress all this within ourselves, it's causing even higher stress. What do you think?
Right. I think that's a good point. I'm not saying we should suppress anger. I like to think there's 3 ways of dealing with anger. There's what I sometimes call the British way, which is you repress it. You pretend it isn't there. Everything's fine. It's what in England we call the stiff upper lip. So there's that which isn't good at all, because all that does is give you cancer or whatever, or a heart attack. If you hold the anger in, it just makes you ill probably. Whereas the other way, I sometimes call it the Mediterranean way, is you express it all. It's Mamma Mia, etc., etc. You're just shouting at everybody, which is good for the body. You get it out, you express it. But maybe that's not always good for other people, because you start saying things that you don't really mean. And very often we say, if only I'd counted to 10 first, perhaps I wouldn't have said it quite like that. Yes. So we can actually disturb our situation. So I think there's a 3rd way of dealing with anger, which is saying, let me get back to the root of it. And it's almost like diffusing it. Take the example I was talking about with the person who was lying to me. All the time I was blaming him for making me angry. I was keeping myself angry. what I realized when I stopped one night and looked at what was happening, I saw that it was actually very simple. What was happening was I had an expectation that this person would not lie. That was my expectation, and it's a valid thing that I expect people will not lie to me. What was making me angry was the fact that he hadn't behaved as I had expected him to. And so it was that conflict between what actually happened and my expectation that was creating my upset. And when I realized that, I was only perhaps a quarter as upset, because I was beginning to see what was happening. So I think if we can understand what is happening in ourselves when we're angry, instead of seeing it, oh, they're at fault, they made me angry. And if we say that, then what we tend to say is the only way I can be better is for them to change, to apologize or do something different. If I realize that it's something inside me, that there's perhaps a conflict of expectations, then the anger becomes a lot less. It's taking more responsibility for it. And when the anger's less, then I think we're in a better state to decide what to do with our friends, the people we interact with. If we're angry, so we tend to, if we express it immediately, we may not say the best thing. If we can first of all calm ourselves down, then I think we can be in a much better state to decide what to do. You were about to say something, Jerry.
Yeah, I agree with your point about it's necessary and important to change our expectations and our own reactions to things. But at the same time, I also see it very important, such as the case with time management, that unless I manage my time more efficiently, then the same problems are going to keep coming up again and again in the future, and I'll have to react to them in some form or another, and inevitably it'll create more stress in the long run. It reminds me a little bit of what I heard one speaker once say, I think his name's Brian Tracy, you may know him, that stress often comes from doing less than you can, from working at below your potential, and I think that's very true to some extent. We don't have enough confidence in our capabilities.
Yes, I think people often talk about underwork as cause of stress as much as overwork. I think people who are unemployed can have as much stress as someone who's overemployed.
Right.
Unemployment is a stressful thing, and there it's not because your time is full of too much to do, but there's all the other pressures of lack of meaning in life or worry about security, how you're going to feed your family. All those pressures come upon us. So it's not just overwork that causes us pressure, many different things. But I think the point you're getting at with time management is very valid. We need to do everything we can to decrease the pressures in the world around us. And you mentioned time. I find when I'm working with groups on stress, probably 50% of people would say that pressure of time is what causes them stress. And I think there's a lot we can do to learn how to manage our time better. Some of it is prioritizing, deciding how to do things. Some of it is just how we organize our time. And some of it is deciding what do we need to do and what don't we need to do. I think very often we get seduced or dragged into doing things which aren't really important. And so I think we need to, again, step back and say, is this really important or not? We can spend a lot of time doing those things, like we spend hours watching television, doing nothing, just sitting there in front of television. Excuse me, here we are on television, but and then you go and, try to pack a whole lot of things into the next 2 hours.
Another thing that causes stress for me, I don't know if this is true for others or not, is that with a lot of demands on my time, I tend often to forget important things that I have no excuse for really forgetting. I maybe just not focus enough attention on it in the first place to remember it well. But it keeps coming up again and again. People say things to me and I forget the next day that they said it, or I forget to remind myself to do something important. It just creates more tension in the long run.
I think, again, with all these things, I think we need to look at both sides of it. There's the situation out there, which is, well, it's not so much out there, but it's you forgetting to do things. It's like not managing your life as perfectly as you could. So I think there's many things we could do to improve the way we manage our lives better. But then the second thing is to say, how can I also, given that I'm not going to be perfect, this is not a perfect world, there's always going to be pressures out there, pressures of time, probably more pressures, that I'm never going to be perfect with myself. Can I live with that? And can I it's not so much accept it, but live with it and not allow that to create unnecessary stress. So when you do find yourself forgetting things or not managing things correctly or feeling you're running out of time, is to say, okay, this is a situation, but not end up like this, so that you can be under pressure without actually having all that unnecessary, in fact, disease-making reactions going on. So I think that's one of the key things, is begin to separate these two things, see the situation outside and how you react to it are two very different things, and learning how to manage both of those at once. And
it's like finding a door out of a situation by balancing both sides?
yes, I hadn't thought of that before, yes. Yes, you could think of it as a door, yes, as a way out of the situation. Or as a way out of being, I think we get ourselves trapped. All the time that we think it's the external that's causing the problem, we're trapped by the world, if you like. And as we said on previous programs, I think our society has become very focused on the external. We become focused on the things around us. We give over importance to things. I mean, things are important. I think we give over importance to what we have and what we do. So I think if we do that, then we get very attached to things and we get very upset when things outside don't work as we think they should. And so we need to do things to manage that, but also what can we do to manage ourselves so that we don't need to react in quite the same way when things don't work out well.
It reminds me of some graffiti I've seen on a wall here just a few days ago. It said, there are things that are known and there are things that are unknown, and in between lie the doors. I think it was a reference to the rock group, possibly, but it made me stop and think that to really discover the unknown, we have to step through a doorway, and that's often an act of courage, and you have to sometimes experience a great deal of stress to get through the door and to actually discover something. It's
also, in this regard, I think that the actual act of admitting to yourself that there is only this much you can do and
Yes.
Nothing else, and from here on it's really up to you to deal with things internally. Just this decision may actually be very hard, because sometimes it would admit that maybe you cannot do as much as you wanted to do, because we were talking earlier that maybe we did have too high expectations of ourselves, so it's somehow being in peace with the situation. Although I do have a dilemma constantly about this, where is this line? So how far should I still try to achieve, and where should I be happy from there on?
So that's your unknown area that you're not comfortable with.
I'm not sure where that unknown area is.
Right. I don't think there's any clear-cut line, but I think the question you're bringing up is the important one, is to say, what is really important? What do I have to do? Because all the time we're being persuaded by our society, by media, by advertisements, by the world we live in, we're continually being told the more we do, the happier we'll be, the more we have, the better we'll be. And I think we know inside that isn't true, but we go along with this because it's continually being fed into us. It's almost as if we've been hypnotized into this way of thinking. And that's something I want to look at perhaps in the next program, how we get hypnotized into this way of thinking the more we have, the happier we'll be. And I think part of, if you like, maturity, we talk about mature, wise people, is they realize you don't have to have all these things. It's about being happy with what you've got. I think if we can do that, then we can reduce a lot of the stress in our lives. And then something else we can do is to begin to look at things from other people's point of view. I think that's another important thing, that when someone makes us, when we think someone's made us upset, when someone behaves in some way that we don't like, is to put ourselves in their shoes, to begin to perhaps try to understand what's going on. And there's something that happened with me with that person I was talking about who was, I found, was lying to me over an issue. Once I'd realized that it was my own expectations that were the problem, that there was this conflict between what he did and my expectations, as I say, that allowed me to be less angry. But then what also happened, I could begin to put myself in his shoes and say, well, okay, why did he behave like this? What was it in his life that had caused him to behave like that? What was he expecting of me? And I began to see that he'd actually got himself into a very difficult situation, and he was just taking, for him, the easy way out. It wasn't a particularly honourable way, but he was taking the easy way out. And, you know, I have to remember I'm not perfect. I perhaps do the same things myself sometimes. So I think if you can begin to put yourself in someone else's shoes and begin to understand what they were thinking, what their worries were, what their fears were, what sort of stress were they under, because we're all human beings, and if you can begin to understand other people, then that again reduces the stress. Because what we tend to think is, when someone does something we don't like, we say, they are being so unreasonable. They are not being reasonable at all. I am being reasonable. And if you can put yourself in their shoes, you can begin to see that perhaps they are being completely reasonable from their side. It's just the two don't match.
So do we bring out the matter of the issue of communication? Otherwise we can perceive things wrongly or in another way.
Yeah.
So we just kind of circle those thoughts. What would you say about that?
Well, I think communication is important. That's something we'll probably look at in the last program, is how we can improve the quality of our communication. And the more we can understand another person, I think the less stress there is. I think a lot of stress is just not understanding a person. I think what I'm saying here is there's a lot we can do just in our own mind, just to imagine. Imagine yourself in that person's shoes. How do they feel? What are they thinking? What perhaps was going on for them can be a great help for us.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Do you think that humor plays an important role in reducing stress?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think humour is a critical thing. I think we've lost it a lot in our society. We think taking things seriously is important, whereas I think maybe not taking things or having fun with things. There's a friend of mine who says you should always do two things, which is, if it isn't fun, don't do it. If you have to do it, make it fun. And I think the more we can laugh at ourselves, not take ourselves seriously too much, then I think the happier and healthier we'll be. In fact, in health, it's been shown that humour is very important. I think probably we should finish now. So these are just some of the things we looked at in stress. But I think the point is, as well as doing many things in terms of the external world to manage stress, there's a lot we can do in terms of managing the way we see it, so that we don't see things as a threat so much. And if we don't see things as a threat, then we don't trigger so much stress. And what I want to do in the next program is to begin to look back at the subject we touched on in the first program, which was the environmental issue, and begin to look at the values in our society, something we mentioned in this program, the materialism of our society, and where does that come from inside each of us? How do we get seduced into this state? And what can we begin to do to change the way we live in the world?